Okay, so I picked up this book today, the Magus, A Complete System of Occult Philosophy by Francis Barrett. Introduction by Timothy D. Dark Smith. D. Arch? I don't know. And I wanted to read the, maybe like a bit of the beginning here. This is Francis Barrett here, student in chemistry, metaphysics, natural and occult philosophy. Magus. So this was published in 1995, but I think it's taking from... So the Magus, or Celestial Intelligencer, being a complete system of occult philosophy in 3 books containing the ancient and modern practice of the Kabbalistic art. Oh, yes, these letters. Okay. Containing the ancient and modern practice of the Kabbalistic art, natural and celestial magic, showing the wonderful effect that may be performed by a knowledge of the celestial influences, the occult properties of metals, herbs, and stones, and the application of active to passive principles, exhibiting the sciences of natural magic, alchemy, or hermetic philosophy. Also, the nature, creation, and fall of man, his natural and supernatural gifts, the magical power inherent in the soul, with a great variety of rare experiments in natural magic, the constellatory practice, or talismanic magic, the nature of the elements, stars, planets, signs, the construction and composition of all sorts of magic seals, images, rings, and glasses, maybe? The virtue and efficacy of numbers, characters, and figures of good and evil spirits, magnetism, and Kabbalistical or ceremonial magic, in which the secret mysteries of the Kabbalah are explained, the operations of good and evil spirits, all kinds of Kabbalistic figures, tables, seals, names, and their use, the time bonds, offices, and conjuration of spirits. Oh no, I don't be reading that part right there. To which is added Biographia Antiqua, or the lives of the most eminent philosophers and magi. Which Paracelsus is in here? Curious engravings, magical and Kabbalistical figures by Francis Barnett, professor of chemistry, natural and occult philosophy, and Kabbalah, originally published in London, 1801. So I guess they put this together. Well, I was planning on reading the introduction, so... The present facsimile reprint of Francis Barrett's The Magus is the first to appear this century. The book has been a scarce and expensive one for many years, one which few students of the occult have been able to afford for their shelves, and one whose contents are not widely known, not known, that is, within the context of the work as a whole, for seldom has any book been so pillaged and pilfered from by modern writers on similar subjects, who have wished to bulk out their own treatises by hoisting entire passages wholesale and without acknowledging from Barrett's work, in order that they might make a show of having been engaged on some profound research into medieval magical texts. The Magus was first published at 17s by the firm of Lackington, Allen, in July 1801. Footnote to that, the price is taken, or like 17 euros. The price is taken from a catalog of 800,000 volumes in all languages and classes of literature. Back to the text. It was later available neatly bound in a calf and lettered for an extra 6 shillings. Footnote to that, Lackington's General Catalogue of Books for the year 1814, Part 2, item 8398, page 297. Back to the text. The enormous firm of Lackington Allen was built up through the businesses acumen of James Lackington, whose amusing memoirs of My First 45 Years has become one of the classics of the literature of bookselling. In an old print of circa 1795 is displayed the interior of Lackington's shop in Finsbury Square grandiosely, but not without some justification, called the Temple of the Muses. Prominently in the foreground is a notice hanging on a pillar, which reads, "The lowest price is marked in every book, and no abatement made on any article." Footnote: William Walker, copper engraving, an interior view of the extensive library of Lackington, Allen and Co., Finsbury Square, London. Back to the text. About the same year as Lackington built this magnificent temple of bibliography, the young Francis Barrett took up residence at number 99 Norton Street, Marylebone. It may perhaps have been a little earlier or a little later, but the building of Norton Street did not begin until 1790 and was not completed before the end of 1793. Footnote: Thomas Smith, A Topographical and Historical Account of the Parish of St. Marylebone, London, 1833, page 214. I'm indebted to Mr. Ronald Smolden for making his copy of this book available to me to ascertain these facts. Back to the text. It was an area much favored by artists, and Barrett's somewhat eccentric pursuits would have gone unremarked by his neighbors. At the time of the publication of the Magus, he was given instructions in the magical arts at this address, and, as he advertises in the book itself, was accustomed to meet enquirers at Norton Street at any time between the hours of 11 and 2 o'clock, who called there, and what instructions he gave we cannot at this time say, but there can be no doubt that his influence on occult students was extremely strong, although the full implications of his teachings were not felt for another generation or so. It was almost certainly Barrett's teaching which influenced Bulwer Lytton, the master of the crystal, Frederick Hockley. Early in his book, Barrett mentions the Brethren of the Rosy Cross, Rosicrucians, and Illuminati, and similar high-flown titles were words much bandied about at the turn of the last century, especially in novels, and these adepts were bruited to be closely tied to magical practices and occult deeds generally. England was caught up in the full flood of the Gothic revival, and nowhere more than in its novels does this extreme curiosity about supernatural affairs appear so marked. A wit of the period wrote, "A novel now, says Will, is nothing more than an old castle and a creaking door, a distant hovel, clanking of chains, a gallery, a light, old armor, and a phantom all in white, and there's a novel." Footnote: On the new method of inculcating morality. Walker's Hibernian Magazine, Part 1, January 1798, pages 10 to 12. Even 20 years later, the Gothic influence was still marked, and a young Frenchman traveling in England was forced to comment in French something that I cannot translate, unfortunately. English, general respect of the Gothic genre. All of the world is Gothic. Something along the lines like that. This Gothic revival had arisen both from a genuine spiritual impulse and as a reaction from the draconian and entirely stilted and spurious formalities which had been imposed on the arts in the earlier part of the 18th century. The Gothic philosophy offered a gentle and reassuring retreat from the all too blatant and actual horrors portrayed so vividly by Hogarth, and from the starchy classicism of Hanoverian days. Horace Walpole and William Beckford, to name but two, went a step further and attempted to adopt the Gothic way of life in the vast edifices they had erected at Strawberry Hill and at Fonthill, and it is no surprise to learn that at Beckford's Abbey, Whispers were heard of magical practices within that enormous pile, for medieval magic and the Gothic went hand in hand, and along with the shivers so delightfully imparted by the novelists down the spines of their young female readers went a genuine straining after higher things. Magic was in the air. A return to the practices and philosophies of the medieval adepts was demanded. It was time for the true Rosicrucian, in the person of Francis Barrett, to come into the open and to show the way. Barrett's Magus is unique in being the only attempt, at a time when interest was ripe, to revive the mysteries of magic, and he clearly spent long hours toiling over translations of Kabbalistic and occult lore which had never been before translated into English, or which were issued in the 17th century, and were then, as now, of the last rarity. Perhaps his most important contribution to the Magus was his translation of Peter de Abano's Heptameron, which was proved invaluable to later students. His thesis on the Kabbalah, too, is surely one of the most cogent for many years to come, perhaps until the treatises of Westcott and Mathers at the end of the 19th century. However, coupled with his obvious learning is a strange naivety, especially in his section on natural magic, and it is extraordinary how such an important philosopher can write such rubbish as this. Quote from the text we are about to read. If anyone shall, with an entire new knife, cut asunder a lemon, using words expressive of hatred, contumely, or dislike against any individual, the absent party, though at an unlimited distance, feel a certain inexpressible and cutting anguish of the heart, together with a cold chilliness and failure throughout the body. The Magus, page 24 to 25. It is Barrett's scholasticism, his ruthless adherence to ancient texts, which sometimes counts against him. It is from this, as well as from a possibly deep-seated neuroses, that his horror of sexual physical expression springs. He held the theory medieval in its mistakenly scholastic argument, and laughable in its erroneous thought that, as Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden because they had discovered copulation, all such behavior must needs be sinful and damnable. The Magus, page 119 to 120. Barrett's Greek and Latin were good, but his Hebrew was a little shaky, and it was an enormous task that he set himself in introducing English readers to the complicated tenets and philosophies of the Kabbalah. He, or his printers, footnote to that, 2 printers were responsible for the typesetting of the Magus, Knight and Compton, Clothfair for Book 1, and W. Blacksader, Chancery Lane for the remainder of the volume. Back to the text, made several slips in Hebraic names. I have been at some pains to correct the Hebrew, especially on the plate listing the angels of the Skem HaMephorach, and trust that it now presents an accurate table. I have also made certain corrections in the tables of the scales of numbers, which may be of some use and which I think add to their efficacy. Students of the occult may easily add to them, but this was a task I felt it was not mine to do. 8. Footnote. An omission which will immediately spring to mind is the tarot, the minor trumps of which may easily be added to the scale of numbers and related to the angels of the Skem HaMephorach. One of Barrett's most important sections, it seems to me, is his presenting of the magic squares, which had first appeared in the work of Agrippa of Nedesham, whether purposely or not, and we must not forget the possibility that Barrett deliberately omits or changes certain secret formulae. He does not tell us how the sigils and seals may be obtained from the squares. His delineations of them are accurate, but a reader can puzzle for hours on how they are arrived at. A recent interpretation by K.A. Nowotny, footnote to that, Karl Anton Nowotny, the construction of certain seals and characters in the work of Agrippa of Nedesham, Journal of the Warburg Institute, 12, London, 1949, page 46 to 57. K.A. Nowotny got fairly near, but he fails to understand, and Barrett omits to tell us that the sole requisite for finding the sigils of planetary names is by applying Eichbecker the Kabbalah of 9 chambers. By this method, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet are placed in 9 groups or chambers by reason of the similarity of their numerical equivalents. Thus, the letters Aleph 1, Yod 10, and Kof 100 are grouped together as are Beth 2, Kaf 20, and Resh 200, and similarly through the whole alphabet. And there is a table here on the text that you'll need to look at here, if you can, the Kabbalah of the 9 chambers. It is necessary to reduce the numerical equivalents of the Hebrew letters making up the name of the sigil or character required to tens or units by means of this table. Units themselves, of course, do not require reduction. Thus, in the case of the spirit of Saturn, Zazel, the numbers are Zayin 7, Aleph 1, Zayin 7, and Lamed 30. The only number requiring reduction is Lamed, which reduces, as will be seen from Ike Becker 2.3. A line is then drawn on the magic square tracing the reduced numerical equivalents in the order in which they spell out the name. A small circle is placed at the end of the figure to complete an accurate design. I do not think it has been previously mentioned in print how the seals of the planets are to be found. Certainly Mr. Nowotny knows nothing of it, although he rightly suggests that the final result was made to look as congruous and symmetrical as possible. Sometimes by applying the rules strictly, an entirely symmetrical result is not always found. The seal is made by tracing the progression of the numbers of a magic square onto a square formed by a simple numerical progression from 1 to the final number in the square. Thus, to take a single expression, the square of Saturn should first be written out in numerical progression. So 71730. I do not quite know what this is about. The magic square of Saturn is thus. Now trace a line on the square A to include all numbers in the order they appear on the magic square B, starting at the bottom left of the magic square. Thus it will be seen that the numbers 816 at the bottom rank of the magic square fall in this pattern on square A. If these numbers are now joined in the order 816, an acute angled design is formed. Similarly, the second rank on the magic square A, 357, fall in this pattern on square A. Join these in the order 357 and a diagonal line in the result. Finally, the third and top rank of the magic square 492 forms this pattern on the square A. These joined in the order 492 make an acute angled device similar to the first of our 3 patterns. The figure resulting on square A is the seal of the planet. This applies to all planetary seals, although, as mentioned above, a little touching up for the sake of symmetry seems to have been allowed. We must finally touch on the extremely vexed problem of the authorship of the anonymous Lives of Alchemistical Philosophers, 1815, and of its constant ascription since 1824 to the pen of Francis Barrett. The full title reads The Lives of Alchemistical Philosophers, with a critical catalogue of books in occult chemistry and a selection of the most celebrated treatises on the theory and practice of the Hermetic art. Copies are known with a variant title reading The Lives of the Adepts in Alchemistical Philosophy and with a critical catalogue of books in this science. This variant title is dated 1814. Footnote to Frederick Hockley's copy contained both title leaves. C. F. Lee Gardner, A Catalogue Raisonné of Works on the Occult Sciences, Volume 1, Rosicrucian Books, London, privately printed in 1903, page 9 to 10. The book is curiously put together, the Lives coming first, then the catalogue of alchemical books sandwiched between the Lives and the treatises. One would expect a catalogue of books at the end of such a work, not interrupting the text halfway through, And what seems to have happened is that the bulk of the books was seen to be too small after the lives section, and the catalog had been set up in type, and the section on the treatises called for a bulk it out. The earlier title, which did not record the presence of the treatises, was excised and replaced with the 1815 title, on which the presence of this section was announced. The book was published by Lackington Allen, the publisher of the Magus, but the similarity ends. But the damage was done. In 1824, Robert Watt, in his vast Bibliotheca Britannica, gives the book to Barrett. That book published at Edinburgh and London, 1824. And he is echoed by Lowndes in 1857. William Thomas Lowndes, The Bibliographer's Manual of English Literature, new edition, revised and enlarged. London, Henry C. Bone, 1857. And Allibone in 1859. Footnote to that, S. Austin Allibone, A Critical Dictionary of English Literature. London and Philadelphia, 1859. These ascriptions are still followed today and are, I believe, entirely erroneous. To begin with, Lives is not given to Barrett in Lackington's catalog for 1817, although the Magus is still listed in another place. 14. A general catalog of books now on sale by Lackington Hughes, Harding, Maver, and Jones, 1817, Part 2, item 9774, page 340. The philosophy of the anonymous author of Lives, if philosophy such a sketchy and insufficient treatise can be called, differs entirely from Barrett's remarks on alchemy in the section of the Magus entitled From Barrett's Remarks on Alchemy in the section of the Magus entitled The True Section of the Philosopher's Stone. The author of Lives declares, quote, if the alchemist believes the science true against the opinions of the most accurate, learned, and laborious chemists of the present day, it may be useful to consider what are the obstacles and how far it is possible to remove them, before he devotes his life to a search which the most credulous allow is not successful to 1 in 1,000. Lives, 1815, unquote, page 113. Barrett in the Magus says the exact opposite. Quote, it is physically possible for any well-inclined man to become an adept. The Magus, unquote, page 57. Further, Barrett's philosophy of alchemy is far nearer the spiritual truth of the subject than the author of Lives ever reached. After a long discourse on chemical matters with mercury and gold, Barrett concludes, quote, when they spiritual eyes opened, and thou shalt begin to see to what end thou wert created, thou shalt want no necessary thing either for thy comfort or support, unquote. The Magus, page 169. The ascription of the Lives to Barrett was questioned in 1888 by Arthur Edward Waite. In his recension of the book, he says, this anonymous book has been attributed by certain collectors to Francis Barrett, author of the notorious treatise entitled The Magus, or Celestial Intelligencer. But it may safely be affirmed that, alike in matter and treatment, it far transcends the extremely meager capacities of that credulous amateur in occultism. 15. Arthur Edward Waite, editor, Lives of Alchemistical Philosophers, London, George Redway, 1888, page 5. That sounds all very fine and grand, but it must be admitted that it is not Barrett's capacities that are meager, but the author of the Lives, and worse, Waite himself. The original edition of the Lives made absolutely no effort to produce a proper catalogue of alchemical books. Short titles, and some of them none too accurate, are all that are presented. The Lives and the Treatises section are sketchily put down without critical comment, sources, or other editorial apparatus. The author clearly had a certain knowledge, but was quite unversed in editorial procedure. in fact, entirely incompetent to write a coherent thesis at all. It was the job of Waite as editor of a new edition to comment on the author's remarks, to point out his omissions and faults, and generally to revise, enlarge, and correct the far from critical catalogue of books. All this Waite entirely fails to do. He altogether omits the alchemical treatises of the original edition, the very pith and marrow of the book, and instead of revising the short title catalogue, which cries out for glosses and notes, simply crams in some more titles, as baldly and as badly catalogued as were the ones in the original edition. It is this sort of slapdash, happy-go-lucky treatment which mars many of Waite's books. He never speaks where it makes a better and more awesome impression to keep silent, never admits to his own loyalties in occult matters, or to his colleagues and fellow scholars. His edition of the Lives rightly refuted Barrett's authorship, but is otherwise a thoroughly bad piece of work from a man who might well have been able to tell us the true identity of the author. As far more likely candidate for authorship than Barrett is the almost unknown alchemist John Kellerman. We have an interesting account of him by Sir Richard Phillips, and he sounds just as such a person, enthusiastic, wealthy, but eccentric, unscholarly, and slapdash, who might well have jotted down hastily the odds and ends which make up the Lives. Sir Richard writes of him, John Kellerman, on inquiring for curiosities at Luton, I heard of a living one who excited in me an intense interest. He is an alchemist who lives at the village of Lilly, midway between Luton and Hitchin. It was 4 miles out of my road, but I thought a modern alchemist worthy of a visit, particularly as several inhabitants of Luton gravely assured me that he had succeeded in discovering the philosopher's stone, and also the universal solvent. I learned that he had been a man of fashion, and at one time largely concerned in adventures on the turf, but that for many years he had devoted almost to his present pursuits, while for some time past he had been inaccessible and invisible to the world, the house being shut and barricaded, and the walls of his grounds protected by hurdles, which spring guns so planted as to resist intrusion in every direction. The front door was opened, and Mr. Kellerman presented himself. He was about 6 feet high, and of athletic make. On his head was a white nightcap, and his dress consisted of a long great coat, once green, and he had a sort of jockey waistcoat with 3 tiers of pockets. His manner was extremely polite and graceful, but my attention was chiefly absorbed by his singular physiognomy. His complexion was deeply sallow, and his eyes large, black, and rolling. He conducted me into a very large parlor with a window looking backward. The room was a realization of the well-known pictures of Teniers' alchemists. The floor was covered with retorts, crucibles, alembics, jars, bottles in various shapes, intermingled with old books, piled upon each other. Different shelves were filled in the same manner. Footnote, Sir Richard Phillips, A Personal Tour Through the United Kingdom, describing living objects and contemporaneous interests. Number 1, Bedfordshire, Northamptonshire, Leicestershire, London, for Horatio Phillips, 1828, page 7-13. Sir Richards continued by saying that Kellerman subscribed to the theories of Rogers and Lord Bacon, Paracelsus, and Boyle. All these authorities are mentioned in Lives. Further, Sir Richard tells us that Kellerman told him of his belief in the story of Edward Kelly's, John Dee's assistant, finding some of the power of projection in Roger Bacon's tomb at Glastonbury, and these very facts are related on 2 occasions in Lives with similar credulity. I have been at some trouble to disassociate Barrett from the perpetration of Lives, for it seemed important to detach a worthless book from a man whose reputation rightly lies solely with the Magus. Francis Barrett is a man of one book, a book which not only mirrors the extraordinarily important and far-reaching Gothic revival at the time of its publication, but heralds the revival of occultism in England and remains a source book of the highest importance to students of the present day. That was the introduction by Timothy D'Arc Smith, London, England, February 1967. Okay, so Francis did not write that book. Okay, I am going to read the preface. In this work, which we have written chiefly for the information of those who are curious and indefatigable in their inquiries into occult knowledge, we have at a vast labor and expense, both of time and charges, collected whatsoever can be deemed curious and rare in regard to the subject of our speculations in natural magic, the Kabbalah, celestial and ceremonial magic, alchemy, and magnetism, and have divided it into 2 books, subdivided into parts, to which we have added a 3rd book containing a biographical account of the lives of those great men who were famous and renowned for their knowledge, showing upon whose authority this science of magic is founded, and upon what principles. To which we have annexed a great variety of notes, wherein we have impartially examined the probability of the existence of magic, both of the good and bad species, in the earliest as well as in the latter ages of the world. We have exhibited a vast number of rare experiments in the course of this treatise, many of which, delivered in the beginning, are founded upon the simple application of actives to passives. The others are of a higher speculation. In our history of the lives of philosophers, we have omitted nothing that can be called interesting or satisfactory. We have taken our historical characters from those authors most deserving of credit. We have given an outline of the various reports tradition gives to them, to which are annexed notes drawn from the most probable appearance of truth, impartially describing their characters and actions, leaning neither to the side of those who doubt everything, nor to them whose credulity takes in every report to be circumstantially true. At this time, the abstruse sciences of nature begin to be more investigated than for a century past, during which space they have been almost totally neglected. But men becoming more enlightened, they begin to consider the extraordinary effects that were wrought by ancient philosophers in ages that were called dark. Many, therefore, have thought that time, nature, causes, and effects being the same with the additional improvements of mechanical and liberal arts, we may, with their knowledge of nature, surpass them in the producing of wonderful effects, for which cause many men are naturally impelled without education or other advantage to dive into the contemplation of nature. But the study thereof being at first difficult, they have recourse to lay out a great deal of money in collecting various books, to remedy which inconvenience and expense the author undertook to compose the Magus, presuming that his labors herein will meet with the general approbation of either the novitiate or adept, for whose use and instruction it is now published. But, to return to this subject of our book, we have, in the first part, fully explained what natural magic is, and have shown that, by the application of activities to passives, many wonderful effects are produced that are merely natural and done by manual operations. We have procured everything that was valuable and scarce respecting this department of our work, which we have introduced under the title of Natural Magic, and a variety of our own experiments likewise. In the possession of this work, the laborious and diligent student will find a complete and delectable companion, so that he who has been searching for years for this author and the other will in this book find the marrow of them all. But I would advise that we do not depend too much upon our own wisdom in the understanding of these mysteries, for all earthly wisdom is foolishness in the esteem of God. I mean all the wisdom of man, which he pretends to draw from any other source than God alone. We come next to the second part of the first book, treating of the art called the constellatory practice or talismanic magic, in which we fully demonstrate the power and efficacy of talismans, so much talked of and so little understood by most men. We therefore explain in the clearest and most intelligible manner how talismans may be made for the execution of various purposes, and by what means and from what source they become vivified, and are visible instruments of great and wonderful effects. We likewise shew the proper and convenient times. I guess that's just show, huh? The proper and convenient times under what constellations and aspects of the planets they are to be formed, and the times when they are most powerful to act. And in the next place, we have taught that our own spirit is the vehicles of celestial attraction, transferring celestial and spiritual virtues into seals, images, amulets, rings, papers, glasses, etc. Also, we have not forgot to give the most clear and rational illustration of sympathy and antipathy, attraction and repulsion. We have likewise proved how cures are performed by virtue of sympathetic powers and medicines, by seals, rings, and amulets, even at unlimited distances, which we have been witnesses of and are daily confirmed in the true and certain belief of. We know how to communicate with any person and to give him intimation of our purpose at 100 or 1,000 miles distance, but then a preparation is necessary, and the parties would have their appointed seasons and hours for that purpose. Likewise, both should be of the same firm constancy of mind and a disciple or brother in art. And we have given methods whereby a man may receive true and certain intimation of future things by dreams, or of whatsoever his mind has before meditated upon, himself being properly disposed. Likewise, we have recited the various methods used by the ancients for the invocation of astral spirits, by circles, crystals, etc., their forms of exorcism, incantations, orations, bonds, conjurations, and have given a general display of the instruments of their art, all of which we have collected out of the works of the most famous magicians, such as Zoroaster, Hermes, Apollonius, Simon of the Temple, Trithemius, Agrippa, Porta, the Neapolitan, Paracelsus, Roger Bacon, and a great many others, to which we have subjoined our own notes, endeavoring to point out the difference of these arts, so as to free the name of magic from any scandalous imputation, seeing it is a word originally significative not of any evil, but of every good and laudable science, such as a man might profit by and become both wise and happy, and the practice so far from being offensive to God or man, that the very root or ground of all magic takes its rise from the Holy Scriptures. Quote, "The fear of God is the beginning of all wisdom," unquote, "and charity is the end, to which fear of God is the beginning of magic, for magic is wisdom, and on this account the wise men were called magi. The magicians were the first Christians, for by their high and excellent knowledge they knew that that Savior which was promised was now born man, that Christ was our Redeemer, Advocate, and Mediator. They were the first to acknowledge his glory and majesty. Therefore let no one be offended at the venerable and sacred title of magician, a title which every wise man merits while he pursues that path which Christ himself trod, humility, charity, mercy, fasting, praying, etc. For the true magician is the truest Christian and nearest disciple of our blessed Lord, who set the example we ought to follow. For he says, quote, "If ye have faith etc., unquote, and, quote, this kind comes not by fasting and prayer, etc., unquote, and, quote, ye shall tread upon scorpions, etc., unquote, and again, quote, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves, unquote. Such instructions as these are frequently named and given in many places of the Holy Scriptures. Likewise, all the apostles confess the power of working miracles through faith in the name of Christ Jesus, and that all wisdom is to be attained through him. And he says, quote, I am the light of the world, unquote. We have thought it advisable, likewise, to investigate the power of numbers, their sympathy with the divine names of God, and seeing the whole universe was created by number, weight, and measure, there is no small efficacy in numbers, because nothing more clearly represents the divine essence to human understanding than numbers. Seeing that in all the divine holy names there is still a conformity of numbers, so that the conclusion of this, our first book, forms a complete system of mathematical magic, in which I have collected a vast number of curious seals from the famous magician Agrippa, and likewise from Paracelsus, noting them particularly, as I have found them correspondent with true science on experiment. The second book forms a complete treatise on the mysteries of the Kabbalah and ceremonial magic, by the study of which a man who can separate himself from material objects by the mortification of the sensual appetite, abstinence from drunkenness, gluttony, and other bestial passions, and who lives pure and temperate, free from those actions which degenerate a man to a brute, may become a recipient of divine light and knowledge, by which they may foresee things to come, whether to private families or kingdoms or states, empires, battles, victories, etc., and likewise be capable of doing much good to their fellow creatures, such as the healing of all disorders and assisting with the comforts of life the unfortunate and distressed. We have spoken largely of prophetic dreams and visions in our Kabbalistic magic, and have given the tables of the Kabbalah fully set down for the information of the wise, some few most secret things being reserved by the author for his pupils only, not to be taught by publication. The third book forms a complete magical biography, being collected from most ancient authors, and some scarce and valuable manuscripts, and which has been the result of much labor in acquiring. Therefore, those who wish to benefit in these studies must shake off the drowsiness of worldly vanity, all idle levity, sloth, intemperance, and lust, so that they may be quite clean, pure, and free from every distraction and perturbation of mind, and worthily use the knowledge he obtains from his labors. Therefore, my good friend, whosoever thou art that desirest to accomplish these things, be but persuaded first to apply thyself to the eternal wisdom, entreating him to grant thee understanding, then seeking knowledge with diligence, and thou shalt never repent thy having taken so laudable a resolution, but thou shalt enjoy a secret happiness and serenity of mind, which the world can never rob thee of. Wishing thee every success imaginable in thy studies and experiments, hoping that thou wilt use the benefits that thou mayest receive to the honor of our Creator and for the profit of thy neighbor, in which exercise thou shalt ever experience the satisfaction of doing thy duty. Remember our instructions, to be silent, talk only with those worthy of thy communication, do not give pearls to swine, be friendly to all, but not familiar with all, for many are, as the scriptures mention, wolves in sheep's clothing. Francis Barrett. Love, love. I found this in here. A room without books is a body without a soul. Cicero. Love this. So, yeah. Here's the contents. Specifically, if you want to see. And I can read more. I have, I know there's a lot of viewers and a lot of commenters down there, so just let me know which one you want me to read. Amazing! Amazing! Jesse Lee Peterson.